just take a quick poll. How many of you guys have heard Radiolab or at least know something about it? Okay, cool. So the rest of you will be slightly confused for the next 19 minutes, but I'll try my best to create a bridge. So I'm told this is a conference. It's not really about ideas, but it's about how those ideas happen. And so I thought, okay, good. Maybe I'll take this opportunity to ask myself, how did Radiolab happen? Because that's a question that I get a lot now, particularly from people inside public radio, because this show, for whatever reason, is being held up as a new model, a new aesthetic within radio. And so people ask, how did it happen? Really what they're asking is, how can I make it happen? And I find myself in those moments just like bullshitting. Like I have no way to answer that question, honestly. And I find this with a lot of people. Like when you make something, there is this gravitational pull to talk about how you made it in ways that are totally not true. So I thought, today, let me just talk honestly about how I think Radiolab came to be. What was it like to make this show? And are there any lessons I might be able to glean from it? I'm not sure there are, but I'll try. So I went off and did a little bit of reporting about how actually did this show come into the world. Called up the guy who was with me at the beginning. His name's Michael Elsesser. Michael and I actually created the show way back in 2002. He's now the program director at WDET in Detroit, and he and I did it together. And I asked him, like, tell me your recollections of the beginning. And he said two words to me that completely reframed what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. So I'll play you a bit of that conversation.
So what do you remember about the beginning?
What do you mean, like how we got it on the air?
Well, about like if you step back from the particulars, like, and you just think broadly about like that time, what sticks in your mind the most?
Gut churn.
Gut churn.
like years and years of being sick to my stomach.
Yeah, totally.
I remember sitting at my desk for long stretches of time, just kind of rubbing my head. And pushing on my temples just because my head just hurt because I couldn't find a way to describe what we were doing with it in a way that anybody could call sort of rational or linear. And I really love that creative experience, and I wanted to create as much room for you for that as possible, but I knew that someday somebody's going to ask us what was going on.
Yeah.
What's the long-term plan for this, and how are we going to pay for it? And it was a long time before we were able to answer those questions. So in that big in-between space is where all that gut churn was, because you just had to sit with it.
Now, before I go any further, let me just tell you a little bit about the feeling that he's describing, the feeling itself. Now, gut churn is an ancient physiological response. Back when our mammalian ancestors were being chased across the savannah by saber-toothed tigers, the body invented certain ways to escape, one of which, according to biologist Robert Sapolsky, was that when you're under threat, you shut down. You shut down everything that is non-essential, including digestion.
Right now, this is no time to digest breakfast. You shut down digestion, you shut down growth, you void your bowels, you void your bladder as well, get rid of the dead weight. That's why people are executed in diapers typically.
So in other words, that feeling Michael is describing, this is the stomach ceasing to function because the body is saying to itself, right now we have to run for our lives.
You start to ask that, well, are we going to survive this? I mean, that's the existential question that comes up. I mean, whether people acknowledge it that way or not.
Yeah.
Is, will I survive?
This might sound dramatic, but it's true. For some reason that I can't really explain, at the beginning of Radiolab, it always felt like life or death. Even though it was just a radio show, even though no one was listening. And I mean that literally. Like, I found this out several years afterwards, but WNYC drops the power on their AM transmitter at night to the point where you literally have to be hugging the transmitter to get the show. So nobody was hearing it, but it still felt like life or death. I don't quite know why, but it may have something to do with that radical uncertainty that you feel when you're trying to work without a template, which is not something I think we as a creative community talk enough about, how crummy it feels to make something that's new. I mean, we had the show, we called it Radiolab. That was Michael from the beginning, the only thing he said to me was, just make it different. Just do something that's not on the air. And that's it. That's all I had. I did not know what that meant. And he gave me 4 days to be on the air. And in those 4 days, I had this hornet's nest of questions. What does a host sound like? Should I be chatty? Or should I be formal? Or should I be personal? But how much is too personal? What kinds of stories are interesting to me? What should I do with music? All of these things were sort of buzzing around. Meanwhile, I had to fill 3 hours a week without any money. And so I would beg, borrow, and steal to fill that space. And invariably what would happen is it'd be 6 p.m. on a Sunday night, have to be on the air in 2 hours. I'd have a 20-minute hole, and I'd be in a blind panic. What do I do? What do I do? I'd just grab something off the shelf, like a sound montage of Lisbon. For 20 minutes. Just listening to the people walk. Turns out footsteps sound the same no matter where you are in the world. And this is what I play. But I guess what I'm saying is the idea that this show could be anything of its own thing, make that go away, literally did not occur to me until very late in the game. Okay. It happened in the smallest, most surprising ways that I could have never predicted. I'll give you an example. 2003, I stay up all night playing with the sound of radio static and a couple of voices that we'd recorded. And in the morning, I had about 20, 30-second sonic IDs. I'll play you some of the original ones.
Okay. You're listening to Radiolab on New York Public Radio. Public Radio, WNYC.
Here's another one.
You're listening to Radiolab on New York Public Radio. WNYC. Wait, what?
Keep listening. Okay.
I mean, I was just fucking around, really. But I cannot tell you why that collection of noises was important. It sounds kind of quaint to me now. But when we heard it the next day, it was the first time that we actually had heard anything, and we thought, we could be that. That's interesting. It was sort of like we were lost in this forest, and then suddenly, in the darkness, this arrow appeared. And it was like pointing the way somewhere. We weren't quite sure where, but it said, follow me. In storytelling, we talk about pointing arrows. It's like those moments in the story where you cue the audience that something is important. You say something like, and that's the moment where everything changed. That's a pointing arrow. It's saying, listen up, this is important. Well, I felt like when we were inside the story that I'm telling you now, there would be these pointing arrows that would appear, but we had no idea where they would take us. I'll give you another example. 6 months after that, I meet a guy named Robert Krulwich. We met just randomly, got to be friends, no radio involved. We're having breakfast one day, and I say to him, so, I've got this interview with a scientist. It's about memory. It's a really cool topic. So the topic is that, every time you remember something, that memory changes because it's filtered through your present mood. So memories are unstable. Cool idea, but the interview is flat. Scientist was kind of fussy. I don't know what to do with it. He said, oh, well, I've got an idea. So next morning, we rush into the studio at 6 a.m. because that's the only time we could get time in the studio. And he does this little riff about Jack and Jill, and I start cutting in sound design in the moment. Play you just a bit.
Let's just take a simple phrase like, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water.
Right.
If you want to recollect that phrase, let's suppose you just had a wonderful thing with Jill. Now, when you think of the rhyme, when you reassemble it, Jack went up the hill and Jill went to fetch water, it'll go, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water.
Wait.
See, the Jill thing is so there for you.
Oh, okay.
So it goes on, and we would repeat the phrase, and every time we'd sort of create a new scenario. Well, what if you're a mountain climber and you really like hills? Well, then Jack and Jill went up the hill, and that would be sort of accentuated. We kind of went through it a bunch of times. And again, we were just messing around. When we heard it on the air a couple days later, it was interesting. What we heard were two guys kind of talking, but there were all these little noises that were appearing between them, like thought bubbles. Almost like the interior of their dialogue was being sort of sonically expressed. And then every so often, one of the guys, me, would swivel and turn to the scientist and talk to the scientist for a bit, and then swivel back to Robert. We'd keep talking, and then we'd swivel again. And it was like there were these conversations happening in different dimensions that were bleeding into one another. But we didn't intend it. I mean, it was just something that we heard it, and we thought, wow, that's interesting. It was a pointing arrow. Let's follow that. So my point, I guess if I have a point, is that to whatever degree Radiolab represents change, we didn't plan it. Like, I don't think change can be planned. I think it's only something that can be recognized after the fact. So what we do now in our process is we build in an irritating but vital amount of recognition time. We'll do an experiment, we'll get together, and as a group we'll tear it apart. Sometimes it involves PostIt Notes, and these meetings are stupid, they're long, they're exhausting, but every so often you get a little note like this. Here's one I'll never forget. This is a pointing arrow. No plexiglass. I can't even remember the context exactly. I think we were in a barbecue joint, and we had just played a piece, and somebody who's at the table slapped that up onto the paper. No plexiglass. Which I take to mean when we're talking, there's not this. There's not a distance. You know, it's just we're all on a road trip together. So I think about no plexiglass when we're doing science explainers, which we do a lot, because there's a gravitational pull towards teaching and lecturing, but that's not what we do. You know, we discover with the listener. That's one. Here's another one. What does it mean to be a dolphin? Again, I don't really remember the context. Clearly, we did a story about dolphins. But I take that to mean, don't tell me about dolphinhood. Be a dolphin. You know, get inside the dolphin and explain the information that way, which is an impossible task, but that's something that we take to heart. So these are two notes that just through this sort of thick of reflection, we've culled out, and these are pointing arrows that point us into the future. So this is a double-edged sword. I think of this as an inductive process, and I think of myself as a leader of this team, no longer as the conductor, but I'm the inductor. I'm the person who helps us in this search. But it is a double-edged thing because you have to know who to listen to and who not to. And I'll give you an example. 2004, we, after a bunch of pointing arrows, we had a show that we were really proud of. We thought we had something. We campaigned to the station to let us put this on the FM so we can get it in front of a lot of people. They said, okay, you want to be in front of a lot of people? We're going to put you on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 3 p.m. in place of this little show called Fresh Air. We're like, cool. We thought we'd arrive, because now instead of 12 people in an hour, we're going to reach like 90,000 people just in the New York area. That was exciting. So we were psyched. We thought, this is it. Let me just play you a tiny bit of the feedback that we got when we went on the air. These are obviously reenactments.
Start of message.
What have you done? Bring back fresh air to WNYC FM.
Sorry, I find Radiolab incredibly annoying and overproduced.
Distractingly overproduced.
Esoteric and obtuse.
Soulless.
What happened today? Radiolab versus fresh air? Big programming mistake. Just turned off the radio again.
Someone got a digital workstation for Christmas.
Message 18 from...
Please bring back fresh air.
Why? Put a QT, slick, yet boring program in its place. I'm not liking Radiolab.
I just think Radiolab is about the most boring show I have ever listened to, despite Jad's great name and voice.
I find it irritating. I also find it alienating. Radiolab is an infantile show. Down with Radiolab.
So, those are just a little sampling, because what happens is they actually put the comments in an Excel spreadsheet, and they're nice enough to send it to you. And so when I read that spreadsheet, I mean, pages and pages and pages of just vitriolic, like, who the hell are you guys? That knocked me on my ass. That was some serious gut churn in that moment. But I got to say, the guy that I work for now, Dean Capello, who's the station's creative guru, said something to me that I'll never forget. He sort of put it as a paradox. He was like, the fact that people are hating on you right now just means you're doing your job, which is a weird paradox, because you don't go on the air to be hated. You go on the air to be loved on some level. But he said, the fact that people are yelling at you just means that you're heading in the right direction. So now that Radiolab is 9 years old, and we have found an audience, a small audience, but it's there, my one constant source of gut churn right now, if I had to sort of summarize, is how do we not repeat ourselves? How do we keep this thing going, keep the quality high, but not fall into those tropes? It's so easy to do when you've got a show that you're calling a show. This is the thing that this is the tension that I struggle with every single day. And I don't have an answer, but we're right now looking around for inspiration. If you're Steven Sagmeyer, this guy, a brilliant designer who's designed the Darwin chair and that balloony thing, and Rolling Stones album. If you're this guy, what you do is every 7 years you decide to shut down your studio. You go off to some far-flung corner of the world. You throw yourself into a new art form. Whoever calls, even if the president himself calls, and he did, you turn him down because you take your inspiration seriously. And I love that. I love this idea that you can institutionalize inspiration, but who the hell can afford to do that? So we started asking ourselves, what can we do that's more modest, but takes a page from Stephen's book? So we've started broadening our topics. Okay, we don't have to always do science or philosophy. Let's do some sports. We did a sports show just last week. Producer Pat Walters and I went down to Mississippi, stood at the crossroads, waited for the devil to show up. He didn't, obviously. But, exploring different ways of being. And if you look at our website and you look at the comments, it doesn't always go over well. Might be an interesting story, but where's the science? I can't tell you how many times we get that. Finally, the big experiment that we're thinking about doing is making a live show. We thought, how could we take a show that is so heavily edited as ours, where our sessions look like that? How can we bring it to the stage? Thanks to Ira, who has innovated in so many areas, we figured it could be done. So we went on tour last year. But again, gut churn. Let me close with a little story. We had our first tour in Seattle in front of 2,000 people, the biggest audience we've ever seen to that point. And we get on stage, and I shoot this little video of the crowd. We thought we were kings. Like, now we've made it. There's 2,000 people excited to see this show. We were psyched. I sit down on my laptop. It's totally dead. The entire show is in that laptop. It's gone. Robert says to me, just play the thing, a little sonic ID that we start. I say, I can't play the thing. The laptop's dead. He's like, no, really, play the thing. I was like, I can't. It's dead. I have no power. It's broken. And he looks at me, and I saw something happen in his eyes that I'll never forget. And at that moment, I have never felt such crippling fear in my life. My stomach completely ceased to operate. My cells stopped growing. My body was running away from a tiger right at that point. And for 20 minutes, it was like we were these two particles drifting through space. At one point, Robert looks at me and he says, we could just pretend this isn't happening. Like he said it almost to himself. And this is a man who famously can fill any pause. That's where I got to. But we made it through. It was painful. It took 25 minutes. We resuscitated the laptop. It was a terrible show, but we got through it. And there is a real question for me, maybe the crucial question. What do you make of a moment like that? How do you choose to sort of think about it? Now, Milton Erickson, the great psychologist, had this notion that you could take the worst feeling in the world, the worst, and you can reframe it, and suddenly that feeling becomes the solution. And so I think about moments like that, and I think I can either run from that feeling. We, as a creative community, we can run from that feeling. Or maybe we do, like Dean Capello suggested, we take that feeling itself to be the pointing arrow. Like, okay, I feel like my stomach's about to explode, but maybe that just means I'm on the right track. Maybe that just means I'm doing my job. Thank you very much.